Go back to the economy class. This seat is not for people like you." Lindsay Shaw, the flight attendant, coldly blocked Marcus Reed just before the first-class row. Her voice was as sharp as a knife, and her gaze scanned him from head to toe as if his presence was an offense. The cabin froze. Some passengers looked up, a few smirked, others turned away as if they hadn't seen anything. No one spoke. Marcus, a black man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, holding a first-class ticket, had just been humiliated in the sky. Not because he was rude, nor because he was late, simply because of his skin color. They looked at his face and quickly judged unworthy. What followed were a series of small but deliberate actions. Refusal of service, calling security, even accidentally spilling hot coffee on his luggage, but what they didn't expect was that the man they were trying to belittle held the power to bring down everything they took pride in. This wasn't just prejudice, it was raw arrogance, self-satisfaction to the point of blindness. And before this flight ended, those who mocked Marcus would be the ones begging for silence. Ask yourself, if you were sitting in seat 2A that day, what would you do? Marcus Reed walked through the airport terminal with the demeanor of someone who was all too familiar with long trips, not because he was born with a silver spoon, but because he had earned every bit of it himself. His charcoal gray suit hugged his body, every detail subtle yet powerful. His shiny Italian leather shoes made a steady deep sound on the marble floor as he made his way to the boarding gate. In his hand was a first-class ticket for seat C2A and the name printed on it. Marcus W. Reed carried significant weight in the global art world, though clearly not everyone recognized it. When the first group of passengers was called aboard, Marcus calmly held up his ticket for inspection, given a polite nod. The gate agent barely glanced at it before waving him through. Everything went smoothly, professionally, in that brief moment. Everything seemed to be operating as it should. But as soon as he stepped into the aircraft, Marcus felt the shift. The soft yellow lighting illuminated the luxurious walnut wood details, and sparkling champagne glasses were set on tables. The space was filled with smooth jazz music, the faint scent of new leather and high-end fabrics. Just as Marcus stepped in, Lindsay Shaw, the flight attendant with neat blonde hair and a sharp professional demeanor, blocked his path. Her smile was thin, full of cold politeness. "Sir, this area is reserved for first-class passengers," she said, her voice not even trying to hide her skepticism. Marcus didn't change his expression. He calmly held up his ticket before her. "I know," he replied quietly. Lindsay's face faltered for a moment. She examined the ticket more thoroughly than necessary before awkwardly stepping aside. "Sorry." Sir Marcus gave a slight nod, not to forgive, but to confirm that he had seen everything. He walked straight to seat 2A by the window. His movements slow but deliberate. He placed his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, then pulled out a thin folder and a tablet, adjusted his shirt sleeves, took a deep breath, and relaxed his shoulders. Another passenger, a man in his 50s with gray hair wearing a navy-striped suit, sat diagonally across from Marcus. He leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "Must be a complimentary upgrade. These things happen all the time now." His voice wasn't loud, but it was certainly loud enough for Marcus to hear. The woman smiled awkwardly. Marcus didn't turn his head, nor did he react. He powered up the tablet, scrolling through a report he had memorized every number, every strategy, every timeline. Numbers and plans had always been Marcus's armor. He let the whispers fade away, even though deep inside each word still pricked at him like a sharp thorn. A little while later, Another passenger passed through the curtain, glanced at Marcus, then nervously checked his ticket before returning to the economy section. Marcus observed, and so did Lindsay. But this time she smiled warmly, gently, placing her hand on the man's arm and kindly directing him to the rear. When Lindsay's eyes accidentally met Marcus's, her expression was completely empty. Marcus silently watched, holding back the lump in his throat with the discipline forged after years of surviving in harsh environments. He had learned that quick reactions only led others to twist the story. So he waited calmly. The cabin gradually filled up, the sound of glasses clinking gently. Seats reclined into takeoff positions. Thomas Green, the gray-haired man, was now reclining, sipping on his strong drink, his eyes sliding over to Marcus with a smirk. Marcus didn't look away. He stared straight ahead until Thomas finally looked away. Just as Marcus returned to his tablet, a young woman walked by. Her oversized sunglasses covered half her face, her demeanor radiating social media fame. She breezed past Marcus, her eyes quickly scanning him from top to bottom before she continued toward her seat. Not in first class, Marcus exhaled quietly. Once again, he reminded himself that presence didn't equate to recognition. His gaze, his posture, his silence had been misjudged countless times simply because of his skin color. They only needed to look at Marcus Reed's face and create their own story in their minds, not bothering to ask a single question. But that seat was his. He had paid for it, reserved it long ago, and he had no intention of leaving it. When Lindsay Shaw returned with the drink tray before the flight, her gaze gleamed with discrimination. Every other passenger received a smile and a friendly look when she handed them their champagne. When it came to Marcus, she just placed the glass down coldly, as if granting him a favor. "Would you like something to drink?" Lindsay asked, her voice as if bestowing a privilege champagne will do. Marcus replied, not bothering to look up. She poured quickly, not saying a word, then walked away as if he didn't exist. Marcus picked up the glass and took a small sip. The cold, sharp taste mirrored the service he had just received. What hurt him wasn't just the blatant humiliation, but the familiar bitterness of that gesture. It always started like this, a skeptical question, followed by a doubtful look, and finally the quiet exclusion cloaked in the guise of politeness. He had experienced this in boardrooms, in five-star hotels, and even in front of real estate projects that he himself funded. But on flights, that feeling always reached him the deepest. The murmurs didn't disappear. They simply took on new forms. They slithered through looks, raised eyebrows, quick glances, every time Lindsay pushed the service cart past Marcus, as if waiting for him to make a mistake. About 10 minutes after, all the passengers had settled into their seats while most were reading menus or folding their laptops, Marcus caught an unusual movement near the front of the cabin. A man in a dark blue blazer, no name tag, silently stepped in. An airline security person. He exchanged a few words with Lindsay, and immediately she glanced over at Marcus and gave a brief nod. The man approached Marcus's row. His voice was softly artificial, politely awkward. "Sir, I need to check your ID." Marcus slowly placed the tablet aside. "Is something wrong?" His voice was calm but firm. "It's just a random check," the man replied. His smile lifeless. Marcus handed over his passport, his gaze never leaving the man's every movement as he checked the information longer than necessary. He noticed. The other passengers noticed. No one else was asked to check their ID. When the passport was returned, the man gave a half-hearted nod. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said, but hesitated before walking away. Marcus followed him back to Lindsay. She tapped on her tablet, typing something into the passenger system. Marcus understood the game. He had invested in software companies providing CRM services to the airline industry. He knew that posture assigning a bad behavior label to the passenger. Marcus leaned slightly forward, his voice low and sharp. "You've flagged me as a troublemaker, haven't you?" Lindsay froze as if caught red-handed. "Of course not, sir," she replied too quickly. "I just noted that you were checked," she added, trying to cover up. "A check you didn't request, and no one else went through." Marcus said, his voice still steady but edged with sharpness. Lindsay hesitated. Her perfect professional mask began to crack, small cracks appearing. "Should I have the flight manager come talk to you?" she asked, unsure. "No need." Marcus leaned back, a faint smile on his lips. "But I suggest you check the system logs carefully before the plane takes off. The timestamps will be very important." Lindsay didn't respond, but her eyes spoke for her. She realized Marcus was not someone to be underestimated. The atmosphere around them dropped. The couple across from Marcus suddenly became engrossed in the wine menu. The man who had whispered about the free upgrade now stared down at his hands. Lindsay, though trying to maintain her cold demeanor, avoided Marcus's area. Every time she passed by, Marcus returned to his tablet, but the data on the screen blurred in front of his eyes. His mind kept calculating. All the signs pointed to an underground process in motion. A process designed to create doubt, legalizing the discrimination without leaving clear evidence. It wasn't about solving problems, but about creating them. Because of the unease when they saw someone like Marcus sitting in a place they thought he didn't belong, he had witnessed this scenario before, in luxurious hotels, in luxury car sales rooms, where his assets were viewed with suspicion rather than respect. But on airplanes in the sky, they thought they held absolute power. Before he could calm his frustration, Marcus heard a male voice rise from 2 rows ahead. The voice carried the confidence of someone used to giving orders. Thomas Green, the gray-haired man with thick glasses, intentionally spoke loud enough for many to hear. Didn't expect economy class to have VIP attitudes now. The comment was like a small shock wave, causing a few nearby passengers to laugh nervously. Some laughed awkwardly, others with amusement. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He simply, silently registered another cut. A cut in the countless small cuts, silently tearing apart the fake politeness curtain of this flight. The woman sitting next to Thomas Green glanced at him, her eyes a mix of confusion and exasperation. She didn't laugh, but she didn't object either. Marcus Reed remained motionless. He didn't respond, didn't react. His hands were gently intertwined on his lap, his cold gaze fixed firmly on the back of the seat in front of him, with the calmness of someone who had long been accustomed to people like Thomas. He had negotiated and beaten people like that in skyscrapers across 4 continents. But on this flight, at 36,000 feet, they thought he was alone without anyone to back him up, easily overpowered. They were wrong. As the laughter began to die down, Lindsay Shaw returned to the front of the cabin, her face showing a forced theatrical smile. She pressed the intercom button, and her voice echoed throughout the cabin. "Dear passengers, we apologize for the seating arrangement error. Thank you for your patience." The words seemed harmless, but the tone was not. There was no apology, no explanation, just a cold statement that something was being fixed. A few passengers turned their heads. Some others leaned slightly forward. Marcus could feel the eyes on him. He was no longer just another passenger. He had become a thorn in their side, an existence that didn't quite fit their mold. He looked up just in time to catch Lindsay's glance toward Thomas Green, the man who had made the derogatory remark. She nodded at him. Not a conspiracy, but complicity. Marcus lowered his gaze quietly, retrieving his leather briefcase from under the seat. He opened it and took out a small notebook. With terrifying composure, he jotted down a few lines. Not because he needed to remember, but because the act itself was a clear message: I still control. I'm watching, and I will remember everything. Across the aisle, a woman in a gray suit who had been scrolling on her phone looked up. Her eyes met Marcus's. Then she shook her head just slightly, almost imperceptibly, a small sign as if to say, I see, I understand what they are doing. But like everyone else, she chose silence. Silence in places like this is not out of agreement, but out of survival. Marcus didn't blame them. He simply knew he wasn't playing by their rules. From the cockpit area, Eric Morgan, the flight manager, stepped out and walked toward Marcus. He whispered a few words to Lindsay, then turned back to Marcus, his eyes almost apologetic for what was about to happen. Marcus placed the notebook on the tray table in front of him, intertwined his hands, and waited. He was ready. But before Eric could speak, Thomas Green spoke up again, this time louder. If first class is handed out like lottery tickets now, at least people should dress the part. The words cut through the tense air of the cabin like a blunt knife. Marcus took a deep breath. He didn't stand up, didn't resist. He just slowly turned his head and faced Thomas with a gaze full of authority and calm. Tell me. Marcus said, his voice soft but icy. What is it about my appearance that bothers you so much? Or is it something I can't change? Thomas was caught off guard. The arrogant smile on his face vanished. Sorry. He stammered no longer. Confident, Marcus leaned back in his seat, his voice still even. You're forgiven. The atmosphere in the cabin froze immediately. Lindsay stood awkwardly, unable to stay still. Eric cleared his throat, trying to break the heavy silence. Mr. Reed. Eric said, Would you please step outside for a moment so we can verify a few details with the gate? Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. So, my seat is still being disputed. Eric hesitated. It's just a standard procedure, sir. Marcus didn't move. Then, I'll stay right here until you finish that standard procedure. He said, his voice not challenging but as sharp as a blade. Unless you can present any regulation that requires me to move. Eric swallowed hard and turned away, whispering something to Lindsay before walking quickly toward the front. Marcus returned to his notebook. Calm, composed. They didn't just want him to leave. They wanted him to disappear quietly and shamefully to confirm their prejudices. But they had picked the wrong person. Marcus was neither small nor silent, and now he would no longer quietly follow their script. With a confident motion, Marcus opened his phone, dialed a familiar number, and held the phone to his ear. As soon as the name Presidential Liaison appeared on the screen, the woman sitting next to him flinched quickly, moving to the side as if afraid of being caught in the fallout. Marcus's voice was deep and firm. It's me. They've started activating the procedure. Freeze the cultural transport contract immediately. I'll confirm in 1 hour. The voice on the other end responded briefly. Understood. Marcus hung up. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes spoke volumes. He knew who was eavesdropping, and he wanted them to hear Brooke Carter. The new lead flight attendant replacing Lindsay was pretending to check the overhead compartments nearby, but her eyes were locked onto Marcus's phone screen. In that brief moment, Brooke's professional mask cracked. She swallowed nervously, the tension palpable. Brooke Carter, the lead flight attendant, immediately recognized the name on Marcus's phone screen. But Marcus didn't care. He didn't need her to recognize it. He simply opened his email app and began drafting a message. But before he could send it, the screen flickered with a notification. Connection lost. He tried the Wi-Fi again. No network. The backup VPN connection also failed. All communication channels were cut off. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Brooke's sweet fake voice echoed throughout the cabin. "Dear passengers, our Wi-Fi system is currently experiencing a temporary issue. Our technical team is working on it. Thank you for your understanding." The words flowed smoothly, softly, like the thousands of apologies Marcus had heard in his life. But he wasn't fooled. This issue wasn't a coincidence. They didn't just want to isolate him. They wanted to silence him. Around him, a few passengers grumbled in annoyance as Netflix and emails abruptly disconnected. But no one felt the weight of this disconnection like Marcus did. The atmosphere around him became sharp. This wasn't service anymore. This was control. Brooke returned just a few minutes later, her forced smile still on her face. She leaned slightly towards Marcus. "Would you like something more to drink, sir?" Her voice was sweet as sugar, but her eyes cold and calculating. Marcus stared directly at her, speaking slowly. "Is this service for all passengers or just for those you accept?" Brooke's smile faltered. "We treat all passengers fairly," she quickly replied. "Oh," Marcus chuckled faintly. "And yet I'm the only one who's had my seat checked 3 times, my passport checked once, and now I've lost the only means of communication on this plane." Brooke blinked but didn't respond. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his voice low. "I suggest you inform the ground supervisor to check the retaliation clauses in the contract. He'll understand my point." Brooke opened her mouth to respond, but a call from the front cut her off. "Brooke, we need you up here." Without another word, she turned away. Marcus watched her go. His eyes cold, he opened his notebook again. Not just writing down events. He was recording every glance, every expression, every change in tone, every small gesture. He was recording with the precision of someone who fully understands that evidence is stronger than any anger. Across the aisle, Thomas Green occasionally glanced at Marcus. But now his gaze was different. Gone was the initial arrogance. Something had wilted in his look, as if he finally realized this opponent was no ordinary one. The woman in the gray suit a few rows back also stopped scrolling through her phone. This time, she looked at Marcus longer, her eyes scrutinizing him as if trying to remember who he was. No longer indifferent. Marcus wasn't just writing for himself, he was building a file. A silent accusation, a truth that didn't need to be shouted to be as heavy as stone. But, as Marcus focused on writing, the situation in front of him continued to worsen. A young woman in seat 3C, dressed in designer sportswear impeccably made up, held up her phone camera lens pointing directly at Marcus. The live stream mode was lit up in red. Her voice rang out filled with smugness. "Now I get why first class is getting worse. Look, anyone can get up here." Her friend, sitting next to her, lazily chewing gum, nodded and added, "Probably upgraded with reward points or worse, forced media coverage." Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't react. He simply, calmly twisted the cap off his water bottle, took a long sip, then set it down as though he hadn't heard a thing. A few seats ahead, a man in a business suit, a gleaming Rolex watch, spoke up sarcastically. "Must be part of some diversity campaign. They're doing this all the time now." His voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut through the air. Marcus was too familiar with this type of subtle insult. They thought that if they kept their voices calm, their words wouldn't be seen as offensive. That if they wrapped their prejudice in casual remarks, it would become personal opinion instead of discrimination. But the truth doesn't need to be yelled. It just needs to be quiet and timely. The drink cart rolled up. Jason Cole, a younger tall flight attendant with a scruffy look, stopped right next to Marcus. He was holding a new cup of coffee, awkwardly adjusting his grip as if preparing to hand over a drink. In that moment, the coffee cup accidentally slipped from Jason's hand, spilling directly onto Marcus's leather briefcase placed under the seat, the cabin filled with small sounds of panic. The woman live streaming even laughed loudly. Excited, Jason quickly knelt down, pulling out napkins to wipe it up, speaking without even trying to hide his mocking tone. "Oh no, but it's probably just faux leather, right?" Marcus looked at the coffee stain spreading across the soft leather surface, then looked up. His gaze was so cold it made Jason's smile freeze into a nervous twitch. "No," Marcus said slowly. "That's genuine, handmade, full-grain leather. It's worth about $12,000. Jason's eyes widened, but he forced a smile and shrugged. "It's just an accident, buddy." Marcus tilted his head, his voice as cold as ice. "I'm sure your boss will love to hear you describe this accident, especially in combination with the live stream happening right behind you." He subtly tilted his head toward the woman holding the phone. The live stream still active. Jason quickly turned away, his eyes genuinely worried for the first time. Throughout the flight, Marcus gave a slight nod toward the girl live streaming, as if reminding Jason Cole that the video was still recording. Jason turned back to look, and for the first time since the beginning of the flight, his arrogant confidence disappeared. Marcus slowly took a napkin, wiped the coffee stain off his expensive briefcase, and then carefully placed it on the seat next to him. His voice was deep and cold like steel wrapped in velvet. "Don't worry," Marcus said. "I'll send the bill to the airline. They know how to find me." Jason mumbled something unclear and quickly pushed the service cart away. The girl in seat 3C awkwardly turned off the live stream, her confident smile vanishing into the tense air. But not long after, as if summoned by the very suffocating tension, Brooke Carter reappeared. She stopped in front of Marcus's seat, her gaze quickly flicking from the stained briefcase to the retreating back of Jason. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Reed Brooke asked, her voice now devoid of warmth, purely procedural. Marcus remained unfazed. "No problem," he replied, purposely mimicking Jason's earlier words in a sweetly sarcastic tone. "Just an accident. Though I suspect if this happened to the chairman's son, someone would have been fired before the plane even reached cruising altitude." Brooke stood still for a brief moment. She knew he was right, and the more she argued, the worse it would get. Marcus lowered his voice, each word sharp as a knife. "You're not dealing with someone who's easily rattled. I'm patient. But every minute that passes, every time you keep up this act." He subtly nodded toward the crew and the passengers, whispering, "You're writing your own indictment. I don't even need to lift a finger." Brooke swallowed hard, nodding stiffly before quickly turning away. The flight continued as if nothing had happened, but beneath the surface of silence a storm was brewing. Marcus sat there composed, but his mind was constantly working. He analyzed strategies, calculated every move, and remembered every face, every word, every mistake they had just willingly handed him. He didn't need to act now, but when he did, the blow would come down heavy like a judgment. Up front, Brooke stood near the galley, whispering to Jason Cole and another crew member. They thought they were speaking quietly. They forgot that the internal microphone was still on. A small click was heard. Then Brooke Carter's voice screeched through the loudspeakers unshielded. "Keep pressuring him until he leaves on his own." The words sliced through the atmosphere like a knife cutting through paper. In the cabin, everyone seemed frozen. Brooke, too, was frozen. Her eyes wide in horror as she realized her words had just been broadcast over the public address system. Jason cursed under his breath and rushed to the control panel to turn off the microphone, but it was too late. The truth had exploded. The entire cabin fell silent. Then the looks began to shift toward Brooke. A man in seat 1D reclined and whispered something to his wife. The girl, who had been live streaming, awkwardly unlocked her phone, but the excited expression on her face had completely disappeared, replaced by a look of panic as she realized the situation had spiraled out of control. And Marcus. He didn't move. He just slowly drew a horizontal line on the page of the open notebook in front of him and wrote down a slow, deliberate sentence. "Flight crew openly admits to targeting passenger. Audio recorded." When Marcus looked up, the person facing him was no longer Brooke. Olivia Bennett. The youngest flight attendant was standing there. Her posture was rigid, her face pale, but in her eyes there was something else. Not fear, but regret. She approached Marcus, holding a tray of drinks. As she leaned in to hand him the water bottle, Olivia discreetly slipped a small piece of paper into his jacket pocket. She didn't say anything. She didn't dare look directly at him. Then she quietly walked away. Marcus took the piece of paper out from under the tray, unfolded it. The handwriting was rushed but neat. "I know who you are. I'm sorry for what they're doing. Please don't let this interfere with what you're building. Olivia." Marcus looked at the paper for a long moment before carefully folding it back and slipping it into his notebook. No smile, no sigh. But his shoulders relaxed a little. His gaze, once burning with intensity, was now sharper and more focused than ever. There were still people with a conscience. There was still hope. Not everything was broken. Still. Brooke Carter had long disappeared behind the curtain. Jason was gone too. Olivia didn't return. The passengers on this flight were no longer passive onlookers. They had become unwilling witnesses to an undeniable truth. The silence in the cabin was no longer indifference, it was fear. Fear of what was about to happen. Marcus Reed remained sitting still motionless. Until now, he calmly took his phone out again. The Wi-Fi light in the plane was still red, but Marcus didn't need it. He activated the backup hotspot mode, a satellite connection embedded in his jacket, a privilege known only to a select few reserved for VIP global executives. The signal flickered, then stabilized. Marcus stood up suddenly, his abrupt movement causing several people to turn and look. His voice was low, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Pass the phone to me." The screen lit up, and the familiar face of Sophia Navarro, the CEO of Novus Global Arts, appeared. Behind her was the luxurious conference room of a major museum in Europe, all glass and steel, modern and powerful. Sophia blinked, surprised. "Marcus, are you still in the air?" "I'm still flying," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "And we're about to cancel the contract." Sophia froze. Cancel. Marcus turned the camera around, scanning the cabin, the coffee-stained briefcase, the crew avoiding him, the eyes burning into him. The piece of paper Olivia had slipped him. Then he turned back to the screen, his gaze cold. 17 violations have been recorded, including obstruction of equal access rights. There's internal audio evidence of malicious behavior, and one employee still has enough conscience to confirm the truth. Sophia didn't ask anything further. She just nodded firmly. Understood. We'll suspend the entire touring project immediately. The contract is on hold for further investigation. You have full authority to make decisions on the spot. Marcus ended the call without another word. No need to explain. Novus Global Arts was the main logistics partner for the $7 billion art exhibition, which was set to travel across continents with the airline as its official sponsor. A moment later, Brooke Carter reappeared in the cabin, catching Marcus's gaze. She froze in the aisle. For the first time, Marcus saw in her face not anger or hostility, but realization. She finally understood. He wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just a client. He was the person she and the entire crew had just destroyed their entire careers over by looking down on him. Marcus slightly tilted his head, his voice loud enough to hear, "You should prepare a statement, because in about 90 minutes when the plane lands, a press release will be issued." He paused for a beat, accompanied by video-audio recordings and a complete chain of evidence. Brooke opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face turned pale as paper. A businessman in row 3 quickly folded his tablet. The girl who had been live-streaming was now staring at Marcus, wide-eyed, Jason Cole leaning against the partition in the back. Unconsciously stood up straight, as if waiting for the final blow. Marcus didn't sit down. He stood firm without displaying any emotion of victory. Simply solid as a mountain. His silence now resonated louder than 1,000 shouted words. Brooke Carter couldn't say a word. She stood, frozen like a statue. In her mind, she was surely scrambling to find a way to justify the disaster that was unfolding. Jason had disappeared into the galley. The passengers, one by one, began to take out their phones, recording the moment that could become history for this airline industry. Marcus stood there unmoving. Not for show, but because the silence he created now weighed like a sentence. And then, from across the aisle, a voice rang out, cold, professional, tinged with surprise. "Marcus Reed, right. You're the curator for the World Collection at Novus Global Arts." Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting the eyes of a woman in her 40s wearing black-rimmed glasses, holding a tablet, her posture as firm as an experienced reporter. "I'm Julia Monroe, International Affairs for The Atlantic." Marcus nodded politely. "I recognize you now," Julia said, her voice rising slightly with emotion. "I should have been live streaming 10 minutes ago, but now." She quickly tapped the screen twice, the red light coming on. "We're live." Brooke Carter turned pale. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Julia continued, her voice echoing through the space like a cold blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on flight 312. Here, Marcus Reed, the international curator, strategic advisor for Novus Global Arts and co-founder of the Horizon Arts Initiative, has just been publicly humiliated, targeted, and disgraced by the airline's crew. And they have no idea they've just offended the person who brought them a global art collaboration contract worth billions of dollars. The declaration was like thunder exploding in the cabin. Someone dropped their champagne glass. Brooke Carter stepped back, her face turning red, then white. Marcus remained still. He didn't need to do anything anymore. The truth had revealed itself. Julia didn't stop. She pointed toward Marcus, her voice firm. The man you're looking at here is the one who designed the brand strategy, the one who helped propel this airline to its position as a global cultural leader. Their biggest deal in life was now nothing but smoke. Julia Monroe turned directly. Each second, the red light on her screen was like a dagger stabbing straight into the airline's reputation. A man 2 seats ahead whispered, "That's the guy behind Horizon Arts, the project at the Louvre." Another one mumbled, "He's worth $500 million." Marcus Reed remained standing, not to boast, but like a towering milestone proving that the truth doesn't need defending when it's glaringly obvious right before everyone's eyes. Brooke Carter looked as if she wanted to disappear, but no curtain was thick enough to hide her now. Jason Cole stood frozen in the aisle, his eyes glued to the floor near the emergency exit. Olivia Bennett stood quietly. Her gaze briefly met Marcus's, just a small nod. No words needed. Marcus responded with a silent nod, a silent acknowledgement, one that needed no words. The intercom came on the captain's voice, trembling slightly. "Dear passengers, we are beginning our descent into Chicago. Thank you for traveling with us, and we hope the rest of the journey will be smooth." His voice faltered at the end of the sentence. He knew. The entire crew knew. This flight was no longer just a journey. It had become a global event. Only 20 minutes later, the hashtag Marcus Reed was trending worldwide. The live stream by Julia Monroe reached 6 million views before the plane even touched down. Brooke Carter stood frozen by the emergency exit. Her uniform still pressed, but her confident demeanor shattered like a glass falling to the floor. No vest could save the collapsing wreckage around her. Jason Cole retreated into the galley, head down like a criminal awaiting judgment. Marcus Reed sat back down in his seat, the tray table already folded. Still steady composed. No arrogance, no pride, just unwavering solidity. He didn't need to celebrate. They had written their own tragedy. The plane slowly taxied toward the gate. Olivia Bennett went to check the cabin one last time before landing, but this time she didn't avoid Marcus. She stopped by his seat, softly handing him a warm towel, whispering, "They'll call you before you reach the baggage claim." Marcus nodded, his gaze still calm. He already knew that. Before the seatbelt sign went off, a man in a Navy suit was already waiting by the jet bridge. The airline's global staff ID gleamed brightly on his chest. The moment she saw him, Brooke Carter turned pale. The plane door opened. The man walked in, his voice stern. "Brooke Carter, you are immediately suspended from duty. Please return your staff ID and exit the plane." A small stir went through the cabin. Brooke didn't argue, didn't beg. She silently removed her name tag, handed it over, and bowed her head as she walked off the plane as if pulling each brick from the foundation of her career. The man followed closely behind, constantly tapping into his earpiece, probably beginning the internal termination process. At the same time, Thomas Green, the one who had whispered about the upgrade, also received his comeuppance. As he pulled his luggage from the overhead compartment, his phone buzzed continuously. The first message. 4 missed calls from the communications director. The final message. We're withdrawing all your external-facing positions. You have become a burden to our image. Thomas slumped into his seat, his face pale as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. A passenger nearby whispered, Guess the one who sows the wind reaps the storm. Outside the airport window, a crowd of reporters and journalists had gathered, cameras, microphones, phones, all pointing directly at the exit. No one was waiting for a star. They were waiting for justice. Since landing, Julia Monroe had already submitted the exclusive news. Her article climbed straight to the top, trending in 3 countries with a cold headline, "The Man They Wanted to Erase." How a billionaire curator exposed the arrogance of the system at 36,000 feet. The airline's social media account immediately froze. Comments were disabled, but it was too late. Screenshots, videos, hashtags flooded across all platforms. The public had spoken, and they showed no mercy. Within hours, several major cultural partners announced they were reviewing their collaboration with the airline. A global arts fund in Berlin even canceled their entire contract, issuing an official statement condemning the discriminatory behavior. The domino effect was almost immediate. When Marcus Reed stepped out of the baggage area toward the VIP section, the airline's stock had dropped 11.4% in after-hours trading. Experts on CNBC and Bloomberg passionately debated the largest brand crisis in aviation in the last decade. The airline's leadership was immediately called for an emergency meeting. Meanwhile, Marcus quietly stepped into the waiting black SUV outside. The driver merely nodded in greeting. No questions asked, no need. Everything had been arranged. The silence wasn't born of fear, but out of respect inside the black SUV. Marcus Reed's assistant was handling the phone non-stop. BBC wants an exclusive interview. CNN is preparing a 1-hour feature. The entire Horizon Arts European tour is requesting an official statement before noon. Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Tell them this isn't about me. It's about what happens when silence becomes culture." He paused for a beat, and what happens when that silence is broken. From his phone, Marcus sent a brief message of just 4 words to a private equity partner who had once suggested buying an airline. "It's time." Outside, the crowd continued to grow larger. The days ahead were not just consequences, they were a purge. The airline staggered in an unprecedented crisis. The CEO hurriedly organized a press conference. The legal and media team scrambled to put out the fire. But it was all too late. No one could stop the wave of truth which had erupted from Marcus Reed's silence and the collective fury of the world. A few days later, under the dim lights of a studio, Brooke Carter sat alone. No more uniform, no more polished appearance. Her face was bare, no makeup, hair tied back neatly. When the cameras came on, she looked directly into the lens, not out of confidence but because there was nowhere left to hide. "I forgot what respect was." Brooke whispered, her voice trembling. "I've lived in hatred that I couldn't even understand." That confession didn't excuse her. She knew that she wasn't begging for forgiveness. She wasn't blaming anyone. She was simply acknowledging the truth that she had allowed fear and arrogance to drive her actions and lost something more precious than her job, her own dignity. The interview aired nationwide. Some people sneered, some people shed tears, but many surprisingly listened. Because in a world depleted by the denial of responsibility, a confession, though late, still had the power to tear down the wall of silence. As for Marcus, he didn't participate in talk shows. He didn't write an article boasting about his actions. Instead, he quietly built something new. 3 weeks after the incident, international news announced the launch of the nonprofit Clear Skies Initiative, dedicated to consulting training and establishing new ethical standards for the global airline industry. The person Marcus chose to lead the initiative shocked everyone, none other than Olivia Bennett, the small flight attendant who had discreetly handed him the note amidst the storm of hostility. At the press conference launch, Olivia stood next to Marcus. No more uniform, just a sharp blazer standing tall, her voice clear. "I'm not here because I'm perfect," Olivia said, her eyes shining with resolve. "I'm here because I chose the right moment, and that choice changed me." Clear Skies Initiative received millions of dollars in funding within the first few weeks. Airlines around the world rushed to sign collaborations, implementing bias reduction programs, empathy training, and real-time crew behavior monitoring systems. Marcus chose to remain in the background. He only agreed to appear if the conversation was about the mission, not the scandal. Because to him, from start to finish, this story had never been just a personal insult. It was about power, about systems, and the price of allowing silence to exist. As for Brooke, she volunteered to participate in a career program for underprivileged youth, training them to work in the airline industry. She never returned to the skies. But every week she showed up teaching lessons from her own failure. Thomas Green disappeared from the business world. Rumor had it he was writing a memoir, but it was never published. As for the airline after the incident, it was forced to restructure its entire leadership team. A new policy was issued named after the person they had once tried to humiliate. The Blake Standard. The academic community quickly turned it into a classic case study at top business schools on how a single moment of losing control could shatter an empire built over decades. Every year on the anniversary of Flight 312, someone would share a quote from Marcus to Olivia as he stepped into the black SUV outside O'Hare Airport. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to sit quietly and let the truth land. That quote wasn't just a line. It became a reminder of the power of calm, of the courage in silence, and of the inescapable gravity of dignity. Because in the end, it wasn't the fall that changed everything. It was how a person calmly stood up resolutely and reminded the world. Respect starts somewhere. Some stories are not just meant to be heard, but to be remembered forever. That flight didn't just witness an injustice. It witnessed a quiet but steadfast rise. A person who chose not to shout, not to retaliate, but to let the truth speak for itself. And that lesson about resilience, about dignity, about strength without noise still resonates to this day. If this story has touched your emotions, if it has made you think differently about silence, about justice, and about how we treat one another in this world, take a moment to like this video. Share the story so more people can hear it, and subscribe to our channel to help us spread more heart-touching stories. Because sometimes changing the whole world starts with listening to a truth. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you in the next stories.